Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining and listening to the Admit One podcast, where we interview students who have successfully navigated the college admission process. Today, we are lucky to have Laila join us, who is entering her junior year at Vanderbilt University, and she is an international relations and economics double major with a business minor. Laila, thanks so much for joining us. Excited to talk to you a little bit today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. So what we like to kind of start off with most of the time is just thinking back to when you were in high school. Like, talk to me a little bit about what your high school experience was. What were some of the things that you were involved with? Do you remember from a curriculum standpoint what some of the things were? But just sort of an overview of like the type of student that you were.
I'll start with academics because that's the easiest.
Mm-hmm.
So, my high school is a little different in the sense that you weren't allowed to take honors classes until your sophomore year. So that was a bit of a differentiator. So I only took one honors class my freshman year. It was actually honors math, and I dropped out of it because it was impossible and I had a horrible teacher. And so that was my freshman year, pretty run of the mill. And then sophomore year, I took 3 honors classes. So that was honors English, honors history, and honors chemistry. And because I had taken honors chemistry my sophomore year, I was ineligible to take AP chemistry my junior year, which is the first year you're eligible to take AP courses at my high school. And so I took AP chemistry and AP United States history my junior year, and I got a 4 and no, not a 4. I got a 5 on AP history, AP US history, and I got a 3 on AP Chem. Also, this was like 2020, so this is like COVID year. And then, yeah, so that was that. And then all the way, I was like a slightly above average math student. So I took calculus my senior year, but a non-AP version. So I'm like kind of like trugging along on like the math thing. I also took Spanish. I took honors Spanish, and then I dropped out of that because I was also awful and I hated it. And then I got to senior year, and also, so that's sophomore year. Now we're into junior year. Oh, no. We're still in junior year.
Yep.
Junior year, so I took APUSH, AP Chem, and then AP Chem was my 6th core class. So I had 6 like proper classes. So I had 2 sciences. I had honors biology and AP chemistry, APUSH, regular English, regular Spanish, and then like an accelerated math. But it was like the second from the highest level of math. So it was like algebra 2. And then my senior year, I took a calculus class. That was a non-AP calc class. And I took a regular Spanish class, Spanish 5. I took AP European history, AP comparative government and politics. I took AP environmental science, and I took AP lit.
Great.
And so that was academics. And I graduated with like a 3.7.5 or something, like a 3.75 or something like that.
Do you remember like early in high school having goals as far as like a career that you were aspiring to or anything? Like how did that kind of take shape?
Yeah, so I wanted to be a diplomat since I was in middle school, and I joined the middle school Model UN team. And so I always knew I wanted to like work in international relations. I've known that I'd wanted to be an international relations major since I was like 11. And so that was kind of always the idea. And I thought I would go to law school. But then I read a book called Don't Go to Law School Unless, that a law student actually recommended to me. And I think a lot of people, including like my dad, was like, oh, Laila, like you should consider going to law school instead of just going to get like a master's in international relations or diplomacy, whatever. You should go to law school instead because, a lot of places will look at a graduate degree like in the same way, whether it's like a JD or an MA or whatever. And I looked into it and I was kind of planning to do law school. And then I read this book and it was like half law schools graduate twice as many law students as there are like actual legal jobs. And the legal field is shrinking because of things like AI and like legal max that, allow people to do the work that lawyers used to do. And you can just do it online now and you don't even need to pay someone to do that. So, in that sense, I kind of was like, law school, perhaps not for me. But,
and so a lot of your classes kind of align with what that is. So you're lucky in that way of like, okay, I have an idea of what I want to do down the road. And then your classes align to it. So you had mentioned like you're in 9th grade, your math class is in honors and you have to drop out of that because it's so challenging. I think a lot of times kids would be like, oh my gosh, I have to drop this math class. I'm never going to get into a super competitive school. But the reality is, like, that's your first year. And if you're doing things that align with what your interests are, then obviously those things take shape over the course of time. And so your curriculum kind of reflects that as well. Talk to me a little bit about, like, outside of the classroom. You were a very involved person in looking at your activity list and everything, but walk me through, like, what were some of the things that you feel like most involved with in high school?
Yeah. So I think a good way to think about it is things I did before my junior year and things I did after my junior year,
Mm-hmm.
because those things changed a bit. So I was always on the debate team throughout high school. So I did not public forum, I did congressional debate
Mm-hmm.
all 4 years. And then I did extemporaneous speaking 3 years. So sophomore, junior, senior year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my mojo. That's where I hung out. And then at the beginning of high school, I also did a lot of light designing for the school theater company. So I like made the light maps and I literally designed and programmed shows. The only thing I didn't have to do was like actually run the show,
Mm-hmm.
but that was really time consuming and also like a really immensely enriching experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was also a founding co-president of high school Democrats at my high school.
Mm-hmm.
And in that role, it was, yes, we like did a lot of like, say percent like party affiliated things with like door knocking and going to local like summits and conferences for high school Democrats. I was
Mm-hmm.
a delegate to the Massachusetts State Convention when I was in high school. Um, but in that capacity in high school Democrats, we really just did a lot with civics. So we hosted an annual civics day and we'd have people like the mayor come in. We had our local congressperson come in. At the time, it was Joe Kennedy. And like leaders of voting organizations in the state and all sorts of people. And it was really awesome. And so that's what I did in high school Democrats and like, some voter registration drives, the huge. And then um, And then I did a couple of like things around like race and social justice. So I did ADL peer leaders, which was like going into classrooms and talking about like implicit bias and things of that nature. And then I also did something called Courageous Conversations on Race, um, which I quit because I thought it was poorly run. But I
But
did
you
that
did
for
it.
a year.
But you did it.
Yeah. I had a demonstrated interest in like social justice, and I did a lot of stuff with that. And then I was in my Jack and Jill chapter. I held a leadership position in that for 3 years. I was treasurer. And then I won actually an oratorical competition in Jack and Jill my junior year, which I'm pretty sure I put on my apps.
Mm-hmm.
And then I volunteered at the food pantry. I worked on 3 campaigns, 2 congressional, 1 local.
So you're all over the place. I mean, you're doing a lot.
And I played softball. I played softball for a year. I quit that after sophomore year. But yeah.
But you're taking on a lot. And I think that's actually, I like the way that you said, let's think about it from like grades 9 and 10 to grades 11 and 12, because I think a lot of times when I'll work with students and families, there's this idea that like everything is critical. And whatever you do in 9th grade is going to have a huge component to the evaluation. But the reality is when you're applying to college, when you submit your activity list on the Common App, you have 10 spaces to fill out your activities, and you have 150 characters to describe those activities. Characters, not words. So you get like a sentence and a half basically to fill them out. But where you get the most kind of bang for your buck is in those short answer questions where you're able to talk about, what some of the high level and elite things that you accomplished were. And we'll obviously talk about those. Yeah.
The big thing that I forgot to mention is Vote 16, which is what I wrote my whole essay about.
Yeah. So that's what I was gonna, yeah.
Yeah. So like I led the initiative to lower the municipal voting age in my town to 16. That was like the big thing that I did.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk a little bit about that, because I think that's, to me, like that's obviously the elite component to your profile that you talk a lot about within your application and within your activities. And so the framework for all this is, okay, I've been working in politics. I have an understanding of government. I've been working locally with different groups. And then you get started with Vote 16. So talk a little bit about what Vote 16 is and what your role was, how you were introduced to it, and how that progressed.
Yeah, so I was co-president of High School Democrats, and we were figuring out what our like legislative initiative for the school year was going to be. And so I'm like literally sitting in like a classroom. I was sitting in Mr. Kozik's A-push classroom and with my two best friends, Ellen and Amy. And I was like, okay, what are we going to do? And we were like, we're going to do a plastic bag ban. It had already been done. And so we're like, we're going to do a styrofoam ban. It had already been done. And they were like, you know what we can do? Vote 16. And they were like, wait, tell me more. And so then that's how it got started. Because we were just like, what are we going to do? We need something to do this year. We need a project.
Sure.
And so Vote 16 became that project. And then I just kind of ended up shouldering a lot of that burden for it. And Vote 16 is a national organization, but it's also like a movement of young people who are saying we should lower the municipal voting age, so like in your citywide elections, down to 16. And it has a multitude of benefits, but the really key ones are that it encourages voter participation from an earlier age, because if the more often you vote and the earlier you vote dictates how likely you are to vote for the rest of your life. And obviously we have huge issues with voter participation in America. And so if we can get people voting when they're in their like home communities, the places that they've grown up in, the places that they love, the places they care about, that's a really great place to start that habit of voting versus asking people to vote in their hometowns or in their college towns after they've moved away. That's a bit of a harder ask. So it's a little easier if we can get people voting at the beginning. And it, does really great things to the community. It increases civic participation citywide, not even just for young people. And so that's Vote 16.
Yeah, I love that because it's also, the reality is when you look at, presidential elections and things like that, you're going to have a greater turnout than your, local town government or your board of selectmen or your mayor or whatever it may be. The issue with all of those things is that probably directly affects you on a day-to-day basis more so than the presidential, right? So like,
100%.
And as a high school student, that's a massive thing. It's like schools and roads and funding and all of those types of things.
Who better to tell you about the state of the public schools than people who are actually in them?
Exactly.
It's like, ask the school committee member how often they go to public schools.
Mm-hmm.
It's not every day
right.
from 7:40 to 3:20, like me.
So talk about so how does that kind of take shape, right? So you start working for Vote 16 and doing some volunteer work. And then how does it like evolve over the course of your, involvement in it?
Yeah, so it actually didn't start that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we emailed the Vote 16 National and we were like, hey, we want to do this. Any help? Radio silence, nothing. So we sit in this meeting and we decide that we want to do Vote 16. And one of my this is like serendipity, right? One of the kind of like adjunct debate coaches who kind of would drop in here and there, Bill Humphrey, who was on the speech and debate team when it started in the 90s.
Shout out to Bill.
Shout out to Bill. I ran into Bill at debate practice and I was like, hey Bill, let me bend your ear for a little bit. I was like, I've got this idea of Vote 16. I think I want to do it in Newton. What do you think? You're on the city council, help me out. Mm-hmm. And he was like, write a white paper, give it to me, I'll distribute it among the city councilors. And I was like, okay. And so I sat down with Amy and Ellen and we wrote a policy proposal, right? So we outlined what Vote 16 was. We outlined the biggest arguments against it, and then we broke them down one by one. And it was very reminiscent of how we would construct our debate cases, right? Mm-hmm. So claim, warrant, impact. And that's what we did. And then we sent it off to Bill. He circulated it around city council members. And then, so he was our ally in on the city council. Mm-hmm. And then we started to build, grassroots support, right? So when you're an organizer, I just want to take a quick tangent.
Yeah.
In high school, I realized I was not going to be the smartest kid. I went to a big school, 2,000 kids. And one of the guys in the grade above me, he took the AP BC calculus test and got a 5 when he was in 6th grade. Mm-hmm. And when you go to school with kids like that, you realize you're probably not the smartest.
Sure.
But I was like, I might not be the best person at math. I might not be the best person at history, even though I was pretty darn close. But I was like, I can be the best grassroots organizer in the school. And yep. I think I was. Actually, I know I was. Mm-hmm. No one else was doing the things that I was doing. Sure. And so then we started going around to local stakeholders. So Moms Out Front, which is an environmental organization, like Bike in Newton, which is, a relatively progressive organization that advocates for biking lanes and alternative transportation, the Newton Council of Democrats. And so we start going around to these other groups and trying to get their support and get official written letters of support so that we can go to the city council and be like, hey, look, there's popular support behind this. It's not just high schoolers.
Yep.
And then COVID happened.
So like, so how does that affect you?
So we just regrouped and we brought it online.
Mm-hmm.
We focused less on that kind of community support building, and we focused more on going directly to counselors. And then at this point, we also aligned ourselves with um, a youth civics organization operating out of our other high school in our town, Newton
Mm-hmm.
North.
Yep.
And so now we're all working together, and they had faculty advisors that had been engaged in local politics for decades. And so then we built upon their connections to reach out to city councilors and to get the ball rolling. And so then by that point, what we were mostly doing was speaking directly to city councilors and speaking in city council sessions, but
Mm-hmm.
also still doing some of that public work. So we were interviewed on the League of Women Voters. We got their approval. So it was still very much of a twofold situation. But I think we started pivoting to talk to more to city councilors specifically because we had a small window of opportunity, which was that there was a special election that had happened because one of our city councilors had just gotten elected to Congress. So he had left. And then another one passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had 2 open spots on the city council. And with those 2 counselors gone, we had a really narrow chance to victory.
Sure.
And so we needed to get this passed before we got 2 new counselors,
Mm-hmm.
or we needed those 2 new counselors to be amenable
On
to
your
the
side.
idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually worked on one of the city councilor people who was running for that race, and he lost. And so when they lost, it like our dreams went away because the 2 people that got elected were totally hostile to the idea, and like the campaign just died because there weren't enough votes.
Sure.
So we were a vote off, and then the election happened.
But I think what's cool about it, and you make a good point previously when you're talking about like, okay, I might not have been in Calc BC as a freshman. I may not have necessarily had like the highest level science in my school. The reality is, and I say this all the time to kids, if you look at like basically any college website, they're going to talk about their commitment to 4 things. They're going to talk about their commitment to critical thinking, innovation, diversity, and interdisciplinary learning. Like basically every single college is going to have those things as kind of pillars through through their institution. And so while obviously you want to do well academically, which you did, it's not like you were like not getting A's within top, strong classes and taking APs, but it's also being able to demonstrate your ability to think critically and be innovative and all of those types of things. And so, when you pursue these types of things to a depth that is much more significant than anybody else is really doing them. It's not just like I'm part of the speech and debate club at my school, or I'm part of city or student council or something, which those things are fine.
Ran for student council, lost twice.
There you go. But you take that and then you build on it outside of the context of your high school and doing those things independently. And so you're establishing a narrative that when I read it as an admission person, I'm like, oh, dang. All right. Like they almost changed the municipal voting age in their town. And she's able to communicate why that's an important aspect of voting and the benefits of it and all of those types of things. So to me, that's like the biggest thing is trying to figure out, where do you see holes? Where do you see gaps? Where are there things that you might be able to alter? And then literally doing them is the biggest challenge for most high school students, because they have the idea, but they don't necessarily run with it.
You just need to have the audacity, like literally the audacity.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember talking to my dad, and he's just like, because I was really excited because I had just gotten off of a call with the city councilor, and I was like, I'm going to talk to the city councilor. And he was just like, the chutzpah on you. And he was really happy about it. He was like, you are just so, I can't remember the word he used, but he was like, you're just so demanding almost, you're just like, there's no reason why you shouldn't talk to me. Like, yes, I can't vote, but I'm still your constituent. I live here. I love it here. I'm from here. And, you just like demanded an audience was like, you're going to talk to me. And that kind of just willingness to just be like, hey, I'm here and just asserting your presence,
Yep.
and being willing to demand adults' attention, and then
Hmm.
also demand to be taken seriously.
Hmm.
A lot of people say, oh, you're so young, like you don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, oh, I could run analytical laps around you. like, let's talk about this on the issues on their merits.
Yeah. And if you're
And
wrong, like that's okay. Like let me learn about it. Let me better understand, what is happening in
yeah,
this
but just don't
and
be
yeah.
wrong,
Right.
right?
Well,
Like
sure. You
you're
can
not
also
going to
do
convince
that.
people to your cause
Sure.
if you're wrong. Like when you start challenging adults like in positions of power and you're wanting to change the status quo, don't slip up. Like
I think that's fair. So the other thing that I think is that you do well in that's interesting is that, and it goes across, it doesn't have to just be like local government, but I
mhm,
think a lot of times like we'll use government as an example. If somebody's interested in political science, they then want to get an internship with like the congressperson or their
mhm,
senator or whatever. And I'm not saying that that's not necessarily of value, but more often than not, what your role is in that internship is more of a job shadow. It's I'm cold calling, I'm sitting in on meetings, I'm processing papers, those kinds of things. When you're doing things that are directly related to your hometown and you're working with like, city council and mayors and town administrators and things like that, like you're going to have a greater role, and so your narrative is going to be more significant when you actually apply, and that can go across any field. I have kids who will say to me that they're interested in business, and they say, I'm going to try to get an internship with Nike. All right, well, you're 17. I don't think that like your role in Nike probably isn't going to do it, but maybe there's a local clothing shop that needs a greater marketing presence, or that you could manage their social media or something like that. Like those things are possibilities. And so you really need to think more about what's the role that you have as opposed to what's the organization that I'm working for.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just like you have to find something that you want to do.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, if you're doing things that are inauthentic or that you're doing them for the purpose of like your college applications or something, that's going to be abundantly obvious when you actually
mhm.
apply. So it's
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 also
definitely finding it.
obvious to the people you work with. Like,
Totally.
I
Hmm.
was debate team captain for 2 years, and I actively encouraged kids to quit.
Hmm.
I was like, you don't want to be here. And
Hmm.
like, and also as like, your superior, your coach, your captain, whatever, nobody wants to spend time on people who are not passionate about it, right?
Yep.
And so if you're doing something for college, which I really don't recommend, at least find enthusiasm.
Hmm.
But like I worked with some kids who were just like so clearly apathetic.
Hmm.
And I was just like, well, this is really time intensive on my end. And especially as an intern, sometimes like you're sometimes more trouble than you're worth. So it's really people doing things because they want to help the next generation. They want to help you develop your skills.
Hmm.
And so you should do that for something you're passionate about and like not waste people's time.
Yeah.
And so when I had kids who were doing debate because they thought it would help them get into college, I would be like, hey, you should quit. You should
Hmm.
quit and you should find something that you actually care about, because I'll tell you for free that if you go to the science team and you bring them to the national championship, that's going to be just as good as if you bring the debate team to the national championship.
Hmm.
So if you want to do something, you know, do something and be great at it, but do something that you like.
Yep. Agreed. Let's take a look quickly at the essay that your main essay to provide some context as far as what that actually looked like.
And if I may, just one last thing.
Of course.
With debate, I spent per week probably like 20 hours on debate.
Hmm.
It was incredibly time consuming.
Hmm.
That's the other thing I would caveat, which is that I spent a lot of time in high school doing a lot of homework and a lot of extracurriculars. Um, and it was very time consuming and it was a huge drain mentally and physically.
Hmm.
And so I would encourage people to have balance and to find the things that are going to make you stand out and to focus on those.
I
Um,
couldn't agree with you more. You don't need 25 things. You need 2 to 4 that you do in a way that nobody else is doing them. And that's got to
mhm.
be the focus, is like, how can you, because that's what the application is from a college standpoint. Again, my perspective is only from college, right? Of like, what's the admission chances of a particular student. And so
Yeah.
from my perspective, I don't need you to do 100 things. I need you to do 2 to 3 to 4 things like really, really well in a way that somebody's going to read your 250 or 500 words or whatever and be like, oh, dang, this is crazy. Like, I can't believe this student did all that. And that's kind of what the goal really is.
Yeah.
So let's take a peek at your main essay here. And I think that you do, there's a couple things that I think you do. You make it, you make it personal. So you open it up with like sort of, you're painting a picture that a lot of students try to paint pictures, but they're not fantastic writers. And so it doesn't come across as well as you want it to. But
I'll take the compliment.
I love this. So I'll just read the first paragraph if you're listening. So it says, under a small mountain tall, my head stuck out. A young Southern girl in her very Southern Sunday's best. I sat next to my great grandmother, Big Mama, as we listened to the sermon. It was here in the Bible Way, our family's small church in North Texas, that the words "practice what you preach" were drilled into me, steadfast, like the oak pews of the white shingle church I sat in. So you can like see that. You can envision this, right? And I'm like, oh, let me hear where this is going. And then you take it into this direction of, of Vote 16 and the idea of voter rights and things like that. And the idea of like grassroots movements and those types of things. So how did that, like, talk to me about like your thought process a little bit in the essay of like, I think that you do a great job of painting a picture of, where you grew up, where you came from, but then what you learned from those things and making those connections. So talk to me a little bit about like what your thought process was there.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because it was just really organic. And most of the things I did in college and high school were really organic. Like we didn't start working together until the end of my junior year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of did what my heart led me to do. And like the most like hippy dippy way of saying it. I'm incredibly motivated by my family. I'm super close with them, and I grew up Christian, come from like a big Christian family, and it was always do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And accordingly, that brings along with it a mandate to action, right? And to try to leave the world better than you found it. And I learned that at church, going to church with my grandma, and my great grandmother. And that's what propels me today, right? It's just like, you need to leave the world better than you found it. You need to do good.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that I found to do good was government and politics, because I thought that had the biggest chance of helping people, and you can kind of enact change on a wider level. But I also, volunteered, and like I interned at the food pantry, and I, translated, their materials into Spanish because I took Spanish, and then I had my friends who were Russian translate into Russian. I made my Chinese friend Ellen translate it into Mandarin,
Yep.
But yeah.
And I think that the other thing that you do really, really well in this, and I'm kind of scrolling through for those who are watching, but every sentence drives the next one forward, right?
Yes.
You're talking about, you get a lot of information in here, right? I co-founded the High School Democrats of America organization at my high school. Then I'm introduced to Vote 16, and I connect with local government. So all the things that we talked about, but there's not a lot of fluff. And that's really, you only have 650 words.
There was no space for fluff.
There's no space, so you got to get that information in there. And I think you do a great job of making sure that everything is moving forward. And so you've painted this picture of kind of the context and where you've come from, but then it's also like, all right, I got to get all of this stuff in. I think you do a great job of sharing that story throughout.
Yeah, you have to get out of the mindset of you're building a beautiful story. I remember telling you, I was like, Jamie, I want it to read like a New Yorker Atlantic personal essay.
Yeah.
And you were like, Laila, that's not the goal. You're like, that does not matter. I don't care what you want. This is not going to get you into a good school. And I was hurt. I was like, but that's what I want to do. And you're like, that's not, I mean, you can do that, but like, it's not going to be successful.
Right. But I also think that you do a good job, and this is something that like I've run into more recently, probably because of like ChatGPT and all those kinds of things, is like you're still in your writing, you're still conversational, right? Like everything's driving it forward, but it feels like I'm talking to you when I'm reading that essay. Now, especially with the ChatGPT stuff and all that, it's a little like, I see times where I'm like, dude, I've been doing this for 15 years, and the language that you're using, I've never heard a single 17-year-old speak this way, and you're in, standard level English as a senior. So it just doesn't align. And so I do think that students need to be careful of those kinds of things as they get into, the technology's there. And so I'm not necessarily opposed to you utilizing it as like a tool to figure out what the framework is for an essay and those kinds of things. But like the language has got to be specific to you, and it's got to feel like we're in a conversation. I think you do a great job with that. So it's not necessarily the New Yorker, but I think that the communication style is definitely more conversational.
Yeah. Just writing, just write a lot. And if like the thing is that like if you want to write well, read broadly,
Mm-hmm.
And so like I've had this is so nerdy of me, but I've had a subscription to Foreign Affairs since I was like in my sophomore year of high school. And so like I just spent so much time reading. And so even if you read a lot and you read personal essays, you learn a little bit about how to write about yourself and how to make that sound compelling, and a little bit about how to build a narrative.
Yep, exactly. So I do want to touch on maybe you could tell everybody what a Chancellor Scholar is at Vanderbilt, and then we can talk a little bit about what that application process looks like too.
Yeah, so the Chancellor Scholarship at Vanderbilt is it's a full merit scholarship that covers tuition, so not room and board, just tuition, which is like the majority of your expenses. Right. So thank you. And it is specifically for students who exhibit some sort of interest in, like social justice, and leadership is kind of the matrices where it lies, the matrix. Mm-hmm. And so that's the one that I got. And honestly, once you get to campus, there really isn't anything you have to do. You just have to maintain, I think a 3.0, which is a B- average. And they give you a summer stipend, a summer stipend. So I get $6,000 to spend on a summer enrichment project. So
amazing.
Yeah.
I think that this is, to me, programs and scholarships and things like this are parts of the process that sometimes students and families don't understand or don't navigate or research or think about. Is like
this is the benefit of not going to an Ivy, right? Because Ivies can't have merit scholarships, but non-Ivies can. And so that's one of the benefits, is that you just open yourselves up to other possibilities.
Right. And it's also, I mean, you're still going to Vanderbilt. I've had students who have gotten into Harvard and then I have a student who got into Harvard and took a full ride scholarship to the University of Georgia, which is, I would make the same decision. Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of things like that. To me, I feel like as a young person, you're still trying to develop your story. And that's one of the things I talk to students and parents about all the time. Is when you think about what is your profile or what are the things that you're doing in high school, that's no different than anything you're going to think about for the rest of your life, right? When you go to college, you're still trying to do things that are going to differentiate you and that are going to give you unique experiences. And so if I have the opportunity to go to a college that is going to pay for my tuition, and then I also get a stipend for every semester that I can do some kind of enhanced enrichment program, by the time I graduate, I've got a much more interesting profile and background than a standard student who went to Harvard, maybe, right? Or you're certainly more or just as competitive. And so I think that those are the things that you want to think about, is how can you develop those things over time, and what makes the most sense for you as far as programmatically what gives you the most opportunity to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And also culture is a really important thing too. Location, all of those things. I feel like people focus a lot on school size, but culture is also really important. So do you go to a school where people are going to say hi to you on their way to class? Do you go to a school where everyone just sits around and talks about how stressed out they are all the time?
Right.
Or are you on a school where people like to play guitar on the quad? These are all aspects that are important. Also, are you going to go to school where you're going to live under 3 feet of snow half the year? Are you okay with that? Is the only thing to do in your town Target?
Sure,
you have to think about these things, because you're going to live there for 4 years. And, if the only thing that is there is the woods and a Walmart, then, are you okay with the woods and a Walmart?
Is that your thing?
Is that what you want? Because my friends at Dartmouth, they're like, yeah, we just go to the woods. It's like,
and they love the woods, and that's great.
Yeah, they like to hike.
Yeah, that's perfect. So let's take a look at your Chancellor essay too, and just kind of go through that, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what it is that you like about this essay in particular, and why you think it stands out.
So, like I said, I really wanted to like write this like beautiful like atmospheric essay that just like took the readers in and just like enveloped them in this like narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really wanted to write that.
Yeah.
And as we previously discussed, that's not necessarily like the best strategy when it comes to your like, main Common App essay.
Mm-hmm.
But in this particular essay, if you can scroll up to the prompt,
yep.
It says, please describe how one of your activities from a list above, in which I provided a list of my extracurricular activities,
mm-hmm.
Has contributed to your understanding of the values of leadership, scholarship, diversity, and citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this story did a really good job of encapsulating those things. And so it was very much of a showing instead of telling method. And I think I wrote this for Yale originally, potentially, or one of my other supplements to a college or a scholarship or something of that nature. And I loved this essay, and I was literally turning in my Chancellor Scholarship application an hour before it was due. It was like Thanksgiving break. It was so, I did not expect to get it because I really kind of slapped this together, with the exception of this essay. Like my big essay I had already written, and so I was just editing it before I turned it in. But everything else was like a little slapstick. So I was really shocked when I got it. But it felt really true to me. It's like, if you read this, like, this is who I am. Like, this is where I'm at. This is where I be. This is very indicative of who I am as a person.
Yeah. And I think that it's also, it's a good contrast in some ways to some of the other pieces that you have, and like your profile and the things that you did, you were involved in so many different things, right? And so like as a reader, you're going to look at like, oh, you have all 10 activities filled up. You probably have stuff in like the additional information section. You've got a million things that are within your application. And so for this is a really interesting contrast of that. It like paints a picture, it tells a story, it gives a little bit more of like a different side of you, I guess, to what the rest of the application does. And so all of those things are important. And that I think happens a lot of times with kids, is that they look at everything in a vacuum. So they say like, oh, like every essay is independent of one another's, but that's not really the reality. The reality is, when you're applying to a school or a program or whatever, all of these things are pieces of your puzzle that need to come together to tell the entire story. And I think this does a good job of giving sort of that other perspective of, that the New Yorker and the Atlantic and things like that you were talking about earlier.
I think I also think that colleges don't want to accept students that are not good people, right? Because that's just going to cause them problems down the line, right? And so if you can kind of show a college that you're a person with a heart, someone who really cares, that's beneficial. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm Mother Teresa. I'm not. But I think in this essay, because I literally was just like, I love these boys. Like I was captain of my debate team in my first year as captain. I was a junior captain, which is exceedingly rare. And I remember my coach calling me, and I was like, "Are you sure?" And I just became so tight with these guys, and I have little brothers, and they became my little brothers, and I just love them with all of my heart, and I was so happy to see them succeed. We were all learning and growing together, and being able to like show that more personal side of you, because in all the other personal stuff, was like, and then I told the city councilor that he was wrong to his face. right. And then in this case, it's like, oh, well, like, look, I can also just be like a kind of like nice, nurturing person who's good at being in community with other people.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's definitely a great piece. And the other thing, I mean, like, look, colleges are trying to create communities of students, right, with
Hmm.
diverse people, diverse backgrounds, diverse ways of thinking, and so you want to demonstrate an ability to collaborate and be empathetic and work effectively with others. And I think this definitely gives another side to what your narrative is. So now that you've gone through this process, you've been in college for a little bit. What do you are there things that you would reflect back on that you feel like either you did really well? I feel like we talked a lot about a lot of those, or things that maybe you would change or you would think differently about in hindsight.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I think I got a little more intentional about how I was spending my time towards the end of high school, right? And I think that was good for me. I would say that I think it's really tough, right? Because I was hyper involved, over involved, um, while also maintaining a really heavy course load. And I actually distinctly remember this, like the month, not the month, like the week before COVID hit, laying in bed because I was so anxious and nervous that I like couldn't bring myself to go to school that day.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
And I was on the phone with my godmother and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and this is, this is like pre-COVID, right? So like this is back when Georgetown still required 3 SAT subject tests because
Sure.
they're insane. And like Harvard wanted to see 2. And so I was like, okay, I've got AP tests coming up. At the time, I was supposed to go on a 2-week exchange trip to Ghana. So
Right.
I'm like, I've got an exchange trip to Ghana. The week after, I'm taking 2 AP tests. I need to study for my SAT subject tests. I can't score above like a 1310 on my SAT. Like I'm stagnating in my
Sure.
score.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have 4 honors classes. I'm taking 6 classes total. I'm captain of the debate team. I am trying to like pull together this vote 16 thing.
Yep.
And I'm running off of 4 hours of sleep and entirely too much caffeine for a high schooler. And I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I was so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I have a test tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of like panic is not healthy.
No.
And I wasn't healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking back on it, I struggle with it because it's like I did all these things and it warranted me a full scholarship, right?
Right.
And I don't know that I necessarily would have gotten the scholarship without having done all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, the cost to me was kind of enormous.
Sure.
And if COVID hadn't happened, I don't know where I would have been because I was just not in a great place.
Because that was kind of like a relief a little bit.
Oh my God, it was massive.
Yeah.
It was like a massive weight off my shoulders because
Mm-hmm.
I was overcommitted. And so something like I was constantly juggling, keeping all of these balls in the air. And at some point, something was going to fall.
Sure.
Because I'd already sacrificed my health. So like
Yeah.
something eventually was going to also like get worse.
Yeah, I think that that's, I mean, it's so hard, right? Like if the goal is I want to be competitive for the most competitive places and I want to develop these things, it's hard to say no to things. But I also do think it's important for students to understand, like, it's okay to say no. You don't have to do all of the things. And that's why I talk about all the time. We had said earlier, it's like, I don't need you to do a million things. I need you to do 2, 3, 4 things really, really well. And that doesn't need to take away, that doesn't need to like, burn your mental health and all of those things. It needs you to involve yourself in things and think critically,
Yeah, be disciplined and challenge yourself, but you don't need to overburden yourself. And the thing is that, I was kind of an exceptional student, right? I was like an exceptional applicant, I think.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah.
and then I got to college and I looked around and I was like, oh, I didn't need to be doing all of this. like,
Sure.
I would talk to people and I was like, oh, what did you do in high school? And they were like, oh, like I was in choir.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be like, okay. And like, what else? And they'd be like, no, it was just choir.
It's just
I was
choir.
like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about?
Yeah. Hell of a singer. Yeah.
I was like, that's it? I was like, were you like on American Idol?
Right.
No, just in the choir,
Sure.
And like, my friends who like went to Stanford and went to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, whatever, they're all like, yeah, like I met kids and they were just like so average. Like they were just so normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so to a certain extent, like we get it in our heads that we need to like be these exceptional people. And that's great if you have, but like, you don't need to do everything.
Right.
And like killing yourself for it, like it's tough. I'm not sure it's or not that I'm not sure it's worth it. I just think I went to an extreme that was unhealthy.
It's
And I
also,
caution people from doing that.
yeah. And it's also perspective, right? I mean, like now that you can step away and say, oh, maybe I didn't need to do all of those things. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's what's important, is thinking
Yeah.
about what are the things that are important to me? Like, what do
Mm-hmm.
I really want to do? Not what does my mom want me to do? What does my aunt want me to do? What does my guidance counselor tell me I should do? Like, what are the things that are important to me? And let me do those things at a level that nobody else is doing them. And
Mm-hmm.
that to me is the biggest thing. And that's like life, right? Like,
Yeah.
you make decisions throughout life about I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. I value this more than something else I was doing. So I think that's just part
Yeah.
of how you grow up.
I quit doing theater, and running the lights for that, because I was more invested in debate, and that was a little more aligned with my goals. Theater was kind of like a fun thing I did on the side, and I loved the
Mm-hmm.
community, but I was like, this is a little more important to me. My coach actually sat me down and she was like, Layla, you can't keep burning the candle at both ends. Like, you have to pick one.
Yeah.
Mrs. Honeyman, God bless her. That woman is a saint. I love her. Um,
Shout out Miss Honeyman.
yeah, shout out to Mrs.
There we go.
Honeyman. She's wonderful. We're still in touch to this day. That's
Oh,
another thing.
cool.
Nurture your relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so
Cool. Well, tell us a little bit to end it. I like to hear a little bit about, like, so now that you're in college, like, how has that been? How are classes? How's the programming? Like, what have you learned, and how have things progressed since you've started?
yeah, I mean, college is great. I love it. I mean, I think going to a college that's a good fit for you is so, so important. And as like a black girl growing up in suburbia in a school that was like 5% black, I went to Vanderbilt, which is in Nashville, which is a city that's about like 20%, 25% black. And Vanderbilt itself is like around like 11%. And then we also have like a lot of mixed students who are black identifying, who aren't necessarily like, you won't necessarily like see them represented in like the statistical demographics of the school.
Sure.
But it's honestly really great coming to a school that has like really such a strong black community, because I didn't have that at my high school before. And so that's a really nice change of pace, and also something that was important to me, and something that I looked into when I was applying to schools. I wanted to see how that school invested in its black communities, and if it was important. And like, one way that I was able to identify that is like Vanderbilt has a Black Cultural Center, like the BCC.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad went to Vanderbilt, and that's like where he used to hang out. And I now hang out there too. And it's undergone extensive renovations, and it's been expanded and completely like gutted and redone. And so that's like a way that a school can like literally show their commitment to diversity and equality and equity, by like literally investing in these communities.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point for students of color. It was like thinking about what type of environment am I going to be in, and being conscious about that. I think that you make a very good point about that. It's like, look at the school about what's available and out there. And so, yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, space, time, and money, like that'll show you where a school's priorities really lie.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some schools don't have Black cultural centers. They don't have multicultural centers at all. Vanderbilt has a multicultural house. We have an LGBTQ house. We have a Hillel, like Jewish Center for Student Life house. We're like getting ready to build another multicultural house. There's a National Panhellenic Council, which is like the Divine Nine, the Black sororities and fraternities house. So like, you can literally identify on campus, like there are spaces held, which goes to show like, where a school's priorities really lie. But yeah, so I was so involved in high school that I have dramatically gone in the other direction. And so I am in one club,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in my school's Christian group.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in an Episcopal student group, which is something I knew I wanted to do in high school. And so I do that. I'm secretary. I send out the emails. This is my second year in that position, and it's great. And I'm involved with that. Go to church every Sunday, which is crazy because I didn't even really do that growing up. And then I also tutor some underprivileged kids once a week for a couple hours. And that's pretty much the crux of it.
Cool. That's awesome. I love it. And
I get 8 hours of sleep every night. Every night.
That's even better. There you go.
Like, I I love college.
I'm sleeping.
I sleep
This is
so
amazing.
much. It's wonderful. My skin cleared up. It was great.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear it. Well, Laila, thank you so much for taking the time. You're the best. This is super helpful. And yeah, we look forward to seeing more amazing things that you do in the future. And, can't wait to learn more about those as we move forward. So thanks so much for taking the time. And yeah, thanks for everybody for listening.
All right. Thanks for having me, Jamie.